We talked about first initial steps is setting up the data strategy and also identifying the right use cases. What would you put first? Would it be the use cases identification process or the data strategy?
That's a really good question, Manny, because depending on who you ask, and you can, I have this kind of discussion a lot is why I'm laughing, and that now I'm just laughing at myself because like these are the kinds of discussions I have with my wife at the dinner table and stuff. So I'm sure she really enjoys that. You know, to me, a cohesive data strategy is not dependent on use cases. Now, I actually got into this debate at work, which is also why I'm laughing. So this is just a very timely question is what I'm saying. I don't believe that you need to have all of your use cases ironed out before you embrace a holistic data strategy. And what I mean by that, just to be really clear, right? When I talk about a data strategy in industrial manufacturing or within industrial companies, I'm talking about establishing a single source of industrial data that various systems leverage to derive insights, right? So I'm talking about a single source of data for equipment on the shop floor, asset telemetry data. But it's also the same source of data for your ERP system, right? And it's the same source of data for the decisions that get made in your PLM and CAD processes and potentially even some MES and MOM components, right? And then you start getting into the newer stuff that maybe you've heard of on LinkedIn around unified namespace and what's, UNS and things like that. To me, that's just good hygiene when it comes to implementing technology. What you do on top of that becomes your OT and business applications. I don't think you need to know which of those apps you want to build first or which are a top priority before you embrace a data strategy. And now I'm not really answering your question though of what should you do first. I really think, Manny, that this is probably a parallel activity. I think you should, I think if I were to approach this if I were running an industrial company myself, I would probably do this in parallel swim lanes, meaning I would start to embrace good hygienic data architecture, and I would be getting the systems in place needed to store the data, to move it and transport it securely, while I also tasked some folks on the team to figure out which use cases are going to give us the most benefit. And I would likely pilot or run a POC, a proof of concept of whatever my, decided top priority use cases. I would run that proof of concept in conjunction with building out that data layer and that data strategy so that they sit on top of each other.
I really like that because one is you need to surface requirements and scope details for your data strategy, and that's going to come from the use cases that you want to implement. So that's number one. And then number two is the data strategy is a means to an end, and that's implementing these use cases so that you can reduce costs, you can wow your customer, or you can create a new business model. And that's where the use cases are coming into play. So I think you need that carrot dangling over everyone's as they're in the trenches doing all the data engineering, all the plumbing that nobody wants to do. But you're saying like, oh, we're doing this hard work so that we can have an amazing connected product and highly differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. And so I totally agree with you. The data strategy, it'd be nice to do that first or in parallel, in part because whatever use case you pilot is always going to be downstream of the data that's coming into it. Several times I've been brought in and I've been asked to do a machine learning project or an analytics or an AI project. And I always say like, okay, where's the data? How reliable is it? How clean is it? Oh, we don't know. We copy paste it into this, we put in Excel spreadsheets. And I'm like, okay, well, even if I build you the most perfect AI model in this week or two, I can't deploy it. There's no value to it because you don't have your data pipelines in place. You don't have the data strategy in place. So I think it's a very strong point. Anything else you'd add to that? It seems like you wanted to chime in.
No, just echoing what your sentiment. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? So you can build the coolest, sexiest generative AI app, whatever, right? You could build the coolest thing that exists today. If you're putting bad data into it, or you've not taken the time to actually establish some meaningful data strategy, and you're just piping all kinds of stuff into this app, you're not going to get the results you want, right?
100%. And I always remind my clients that data strategy, that's the vastly underappreciated part. When I was first learning the golf, my pops gave me this adage that this always stuck with me is that you drive for show, but you putt for dough. Right? Like all the highlights are always like people ripping it off off of the tee and like just sailing. But the people that are winning the tournaments, they're like hitting those long putts, like not as sexy, not as cool, but that's what gets you tournaments. And in a similar way, the data integration, the data wrangling, the data strategy, that's going to be the dough. That's what's really going to help you make everything else downstream much easier. Again, it's hard to appreciate because it's plumbing, it's infrastructure, and it tends to be a cost and very painful because you're forcing yourself to look into your legacy systems, and sometimes you just don't want to look at it. It's so bad. But you have to kind of look at it and get that unwrangled to unlock that feature value.
And you hit on something really important there. When you talk about embracing a data strategy or just establishing essentially the infrastructure to support this pipeline or flow of your industrial data, you're right, it's an expense, right? That's an investment. And the reason why I really like to do that in parallel with a tangible use case or business outcome is because if you go to your leadership, especially at a small, medium business where they don't fully understand some of these topics that we're talking about because it's not something that exists today in the organization. If you go and seek funding just for an underlying data strategy, there's nothing tangible on the output of that, right? Other than it's cost. And so if you can say, hey, we're going to tackle this use case around quality or throughput or yield. And oh, by the way, we're going to make sure we're really buttoned up on the way we do this because here's this comprehensive data flow. And by the way, when we do our next use case, we just piggyback right off this infrastructure. Now it's built. That's a very different story, right? All of a sudden that becomes compelling for scale.